The FDA wanted you to lie to your consumers.
They're on a warpath to get rid of raw milk.
And you guys are the only raw cheese brand that's actually raw.
The FDA told us we're the last ones. Damn right, we're not changing. It's fraud to do otherwise.
Mark McAfee is back for another conversation on Grounded Wellness today. Mark is the founder of Raw Farm USA, the largest raw dairy farm in the world. Today's conversation is different. Raw Farm has found itself at the center of a major battle involving the FDA. Well, you're asking us to destroy thousands and thousands of dollars in product.
It was $2 million.
Mark takes us behind the scenes of what actually happened.
They refused to answer questions that we proposed to them.
And why raw milk is facing a level of food scrutiny that most foods never receive.
We will not lie, we will not commit fraud, we will not be misleading, and I don't serve the FDA. I serve people. Excuse me for being emotional, but it's that deep.
Let's dig in. Really quick before we dive in, we love getting your feedback, so please take a second to leave a comment and tell us that your favorite topics that we've covered or guests that you want to see on the show in the future. Also, by reviewing, liking, and subscribing, you'll never miss a single episode, and we get to keep providing you with this ad-free podcast. Okay, without further ado, let's get back into it. Mark McAfee, welcome back to Grounded Wellness. You've been here before. You're one of our few repeat guests that we've had on the show, and your first episode was a huge hit. I definitely recommend that anyone listening go back and listen to that one if you haven't seen it yet. It was episode 19, and in that one, we talked a lot about what raw milk is, what the benefits of raw milk are, the difference between raw and pasteurized. Covered a lot of ground, and we'll talk about some of that today. But what I really want to talk to you about is this whole debacle going on right now with the FDA and Raw Farm, specifically in relation to your raw cheese products. So I first became aware of this when I saw a video that your son Aaron posted on the Raw Farm Instagram.
Yep.
Your son is the president of the company?
He's the president.
Okay.
Runs the operations. Yep.
And he posted a video and shared that the FDA had alleged that there was E. coli in raw farm cheese that was associated with a multi-state outbreak. Mm-hmm. He stated that the allegations were false.
Correct.
And that Raw Farm would not be issuing a voluntary recall.
Correct.
As you guys have always done in the past. And then 2 weeks later, Raw Farm issued a statement letting people know that you guys would in fact be moving forward with the recall. What happened in between that initial video and the recall statement that later followed?
When we issued the voluntary recall, we said under protest.
I saw that.
That really, really didn't land well with the FDA. A lot of dialogue going on, a lot of Zoom calls going back and forth. By the way, they wouldn't turn on their Zoom video. They didn't want to be seen who they were. It was just, they wanted their voices to be heard, but their faces not to be recognized. They did not recognize and realize that we had the data and they didn't have the data. Now, what do I mean by data? Well, we have a pathogen lab on farm. This didn't come out in the news. It's coming out in your news today. But we had 14,000 tests of our cheese, butter, cream, milk, all of our products from September through February, 14,000 tests, about 80, 90 tests a day on our products. And all of them were negative for E. coli 0157H7. So we had the data. We had the data. That's called causation. When you can link somebody from your product to their illness, that's called causation. What they had was epidemiological evidence. Now, what is that? Well, it's not admissible in court. And number two, it comes from fecal samples collected by PulseNet across the United States. And what they do is whole genome sequencing. And they have questionnaires that they ask patients that became ill from whatever source, what they consumed. Well, what they consumed was a broad range of things. Raw cheese from our farm, raw cheese from somebody else's farm, raw milk from unbranded sources. And some people weren't even classified. There was 2 that weren't even classified with whole genome sequence related, but had consumed raw dairy. So what they do is they take this massive amount of data. I mean, you think about this for a second. 900 people every day have this data come through with the whole genome sequencing and PulseNet. 900 every day. So from all sources of E. coli in America, it's a massive thing that happens every day. Well, they wanted to look at these 9 over 6 months. And we said, we've got the data showing we're not connected to these people. And we want to see the questionnaires that these people fulfilled that were asked of them to find out what the data was before we do any kind of recall. They refused to give us the questionnaires. They said, you're asking too many questions. I said, we don't run on emotion. We run on hard data. We want to see the information. We're scientists here. We want to see the data. We had the data. We had the test data, and they didn't have any because all the tests they'd performed were negative, and they hadn't done any tests on our products. So they asked their state partners in Texas and Florida.
If they hadn't done any tests, what tests were negative if they hadn't done testing on your products?
The tests that had come through were all negative.
Okay.
So state of Texas did some testing, state of Florida did testing, California did testing, all of them completely negative. And we said we have 14,000 more tests that are all negative.
Yes, because this is the testing that you guys are doing before anything even leaves your facility.
Correct. So
and you have records of all of that.
By batch. So we know what's in the food before it ever gets consumed. It's on the farm test.
And it's not like anything's going to change, right? Like if it doesn't have E. coli when you test it, it's not going to later develop it.
A secure cap on the label there. You can't take it off and spin it, right?
Yeah.
So we know what's in there, and it's secured as an individual unit. Well, the state of California had no problem with our product. We're all good. They'd done the testing. We know the data. It was all good. It was the FDA, not state of California.
Okay.
You notice there was no disruption in California. It was all pretty good. It was interstate commerce of raw cheese in other states, Texas and Florida. And so we asked them to please do testing on the cheese, and they did. And all the tests came back completely negative. We said, yeah, that's because we know what was in that cheese before it ever left. And this is a very unusual place the FDA has never found themselves in. Was some place that had a pioneering vision and actually implemented an on-farm pathogen testing program with PCR. And PCR is extremely sensitive, down to 50 logs. 50 logs is a number with 50 zeros on it.
Okay.
It's so big, I don't think, my grandkids call it Google numbers, that after 18 hours of culture broth culturing, and you do your Quant 5 Studio PCR, it's not there, it's not there.
Mm-hmm.
So we had that data, and the FDA did not know what to do with it.
So when they came to you with saying that there was a possible link and they wanted you to do the recall, you then said, well, we have all of our data, and then they did additional testing. All of that was negative. So
the first thing we said was, is there anyone sick in the hospital? How are they? Said, no, there's nobody sick in the hospital. Well, when were the illnesses? 4 to 6 months ago.
Oh, so the illnesses themselves were not even.
No, there's nobody sick today.
Even that, was it even that serious? Do you know the severity of the illnesses?
Only 2 people actually were seen at a hospital. The rest recovered at home.
Okay.
That we are aware of. So this was basic E. coli. Got it. Nobody wants to have that. But we asked them, are there anybody sick in the hospital? They said no. This happened in September, October, November, 6 months ago. So there's no acute illnesses today. No. All right. Then can you take 2 or 3 days and give us some data so we can actually understand why we would need to do a recall? Because here's all the evidence why we wouldn't. 14,000 tests. And we'd like to see the questionnaires that these consumers filled out, which they didn't want to give to us.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very much a non-transparent kind of thing where they're just trying to bully us into doing a recall. They didn't have any evidence.
Yeah. I mean, there's just so many flaws. Like, 1, no evidence. 2, anything that, even if there was evidence of something, that milk would not still be on shelves today. These are new batches of milk now.
Let's do this. It was not milk.
Oh, cheese, right, cheese.
Cheese.
Yeah.
It quickly became a discussion about milk because that was convenient to talk about, but milk was not implicated.
Yeah.
What's interesting about this is the same milk that we had consumed throughout the state of California caused zero illnesses in California, had been tested extensively by us and state of California, was made into the cheese.
Mm-hmm.
And the cheese is arguably more safe than milk because it's aged 60 days with salt and it's low moisture with a low pH.
So given the absurdity of all of this, your response when they came to you was no, we don't agree, we're not doing this. What changed then 2 weeks later for you guys to issue the voluntary recall under protest?
Well, we said no, but conditionally we said we need to see more information. What is causing you to be considering this a crisis? Can you tell us more? And they wouldn't. They said, we have epidemiological evidence. Well, show us that evidence. And when they did, it was incomplete. They wouldn't give us any causation, which is show us a pathogen that matches a consumer. They couldn't and they wouldn't. They refused to do that. So what happened 2 weeks later? Well, they said this could take months. So what's the fastest way to get this behind us? Well, do a voluntary recall and just recall those batches we're concerned about. I said, you mean recall batches that are pathogen-free? They said, yes. There were a lot of pounds, tens of thousands of pounds of cheese destroyed that were completely negative for E. coli O157H7. We did that because that was the fastest way for them to conclude their investigation, was to get rid of those batches they were concerned about, even though the state of Texas, Florida, California had already done testing on batches of those cheese, and all of them completely negative for pathogens, just like we said they were, because we had the tests already. So that was the fastest way to get through this FDA thing, was to declare a recall, do it under protest, because we had data saying, shoot first, ask questions later seems to be their policy at this point. You don't do your investigation and figure out who's guilty first. You just shoot first, don't worry about the answers.
And you mentioned they were upset at that language that you had added in there?
I didn't care if they're upset. I wanted to tell the truth.
Yeah. What was their response to it? What did they say?
They didn't really have jurisdiction over how we were going to conduct our voluntary recall. Because here's the interesting thing. They couldn't conduct a mandatory recall. Do you know why?
Why?
The Food Safety Modernization Act requires you have causation.
Yeah.
And they didn't have causation. So you have to have a cause to actually do a mandatory recall. They didn't have cause. So,
which makes sense.
Yeah, it's what the Food Safety Modernization Act says. It's like, if you have a pathogen in the product, you find it, yes, you should recall, and by the way, the FDA can make you do it. I agree with that. Bottom line was, they had none of that. So they couldn't do a mandatory recall. They relied on us to do a voluntary recall, which was associated with all kinds of brand condemning things, like DPH here in California said, thou shalt not ever drink any raw dairy ever. It had nothing to do with raw dairy, it had to do with raw cheese. So there was all kinds of really brand assassinating, terrible things that they did associated with their releases that came out.
I'm curious, do you feel like any of that had an impact on customer base or sales, or did people just like rally around you guys even more when all of this was going on? I mean, obviously there was an impact, monetary impact of getting rid of all those batches of cheese, but just in terms of customer support, how did that land with people?
Our brand and the movement has evolved now over the many years we've been working hard at this, where it's become kind of an interesting dynamic, where if the FDA passionately says something, run the other way and do the opposite. And so
I think a lot of people are feeling like that.
Our core consumer feel that way. I'm sure probably some of the new people, like, I'm concerned because they trust the FDA, which we should. They should have integrity and not be saying things that are not true. And they should have facts behind their statements. If they had facts behind their statements, I'd be the first one to agree. They don't, then I won't. I am questioning, I'm wanting data. So I think at this point, the consumers have consolidated around the fact that they trust their farmer more than the FDA, because we ethically really, really take responsibility for our products. And we have the pathogen tests, and we're doing the right things, the right conditions, all the things we do with our cows. You can come see it. And they feel that in their heart and in their gut themselves, and the experience themselves. The biggest damage was to our big store partners. It said, ooh, FDA said it, we're going to drop your products for a little while until they say okay. So drop cheese in 13 states because of that. And that was a pretty big hit to us. So there is a damage. Unfortunately, we can't collect that back from the FDA when they could find no evidence at all, because of the sovereign immunity that the government has. Sovereign immunity prevents collection from the FDA because they have immunity as a government entity. And they are supposed to work on our behalf, and I can understand that. But if they're working on our behalf and not using facts and not using appropriate information, they're not working on our behalf at that point. Remember this, the FDA absolutely hates raw milk. Cannot stand it. They don't like raw cheese, they don't like anything raw, because their standards say it's filthy. And I have to agree with their standards, because their standards excuse filth. Everything gets pasteurized. And they refuse to meet with us to talk about clean standards.
Yeah, and we talked about this a lot last time. Like, the milk that is sold in stores, it actually does need to be pasteurized because it is so filthy, because the cows are raised in such filthy conditions and the milk is extracted in such filthy conditions. It is nasty milk with a lot of bad bacteria in it that requires pasteurization.
Correct.
But what you're doing is so much different than that.
There's a series called Do Dairy Different. And Do Dairy Different is something that my daughter Kaylee is working on, that's going to explain all the things around doing dairy different for people versus a processor. And there's an incredible amount of work that we do that the other farmers wouldn't do, don't need to do.
Yeah. Can you share just a little bit of that?
Sure.
Kind of give us a glimpse of the extra procedures and measures that you guys take to make sure that your milk is super clean?
It's a grass to glass comprehensive approach to all of the risks for production of raw milk. The conditions where the cows lay down, sunshine, grass, the water's tested. Make sure that they have good mineral supplementation to make sure they're very healthy, and the energy levels, nutritionists, and what they eat to make sure they have a good ration. How the udder is cleaned. There's no manure on any of our udders, completely impeccable udders. How we put the machines on, how we collect the milk, how rapidly we chill the milk. If you do milk for pasteurization, they allow up to 2 hours or even longer to get the milk below 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, the milk comes out of the cow at 99 to 100 degrees. That's mammalian milk. We get the milk to 36 degrees in 1 minute.
Wow.
So 2.5 hours below 50, 36 degrees in 1 minute. Massive change. We store the milk in a bulk tank for 18 hours to collect that sample to take it to our pathogen lab to assure that it has no pathogens. Listeria, E. coli, Campylobacter, Salmonella are 0, none. And then the coliform counts are less than 10, which is the same number you achieve by pasteurization, but we don't pasteurize. We do it by being clean. But that tells you how absolutely filthy milk that goes to be pasteurized will be before it gets pasteurized, before it's deadened. And by the way, pasteurization does not remove the bacteria from the milk. It just kills it, leaves it in place. It's one of the reasons why it's so allergenic.
Interesting.
Dead bacteria is not something your body wants in its body. So just an incredible amount of different things we do, including milk only from our dairy going to our creamery into our bottles. That milk comes from our dairies, our 2 dairies, not 50 different dairies combined together.
Okay, and
So
that's the norm in the conventional dairy world?
Could be 100 dairies.
Wow.
Yeah, it's everybody in the area that has a contract with that creamery gets dumped into one big tank to be pasteurized. And it should be. Mm-hmm. So that's where the FDA is right. But what they're wrong is they're failing to recognize the consumer desire and demand for raw milk for human consumption and understand the technology and the standards to produce that, which is done differently. They refuse to talk about it. They absolutely refuse to talk about it.
So when you did the voluntary recall, it was kind of to get them off your case and it was like a way forward.
It was a way to get through the process, correct.
Yeah. And so where do things stand now? I know you mentioned that you are no longer able to sell all raw dairy or just raw cheese across state lines?
All products are approved across state lines everywhere right now.
Oh, okay.
We're back to normal.
So everything's
Yes.
normal.
The only thing that's not normal is that we are going to take the FDA to federal court and make them answer the questions they refused to answer during the recall. We asked them a bunch of questions. They said, "You have too many questions." I said, "Well, we have some answers we need."
Well, you're asking us to just destroy like a lot of, I'm sure, like thousands and thousands of dollars in product. And so
it was $2 million.
Wow.
Yeah, wow.
I mean, that's very significant, and definitely I would think that you would have the right to ask questions about that.
Correct. And they refused to answer questions that we proposed to them. So we have several questions we want from them, like, why did you demand that we should pasteurize our cheese and label it as raw like everybody else does?
Yeah, I really want to talk about this.
That came out of Jane Choi's mouth, and she's an inspector from the FDA on our premises, witnessed by people. They demanded that we pasteurize our cheese and then label it as raw.
And that's what's happening with most, quote, raw cheese in grocery stores today. People may be confused because we've had this Organic Valley, quote, raw cheese on our little table here next to Raw Farm Milk. Obviously different brand, but there's a reason it's here. Can you tell everyone what the deal is with Organic Valley raw cheese?
Front, raw cheddar, which I would think means hasn't been processed or pasteurized or heated, and it still contains its bioactives, which people want, like a French cheese, the French paradox, health building things. The bioactives is the wonderful thing. Do a ChatGPT and find out all the bioactives in unprocessed milk. It's amazing. There's 50 of them, incredibly powerful health-bringing product elements. This says raw cheddar cheese. On the back, it says, to achieve optimal flavor, we heat the milk to 158 degrees.
Which is pasteurization.
Yep. And by the way, let's not just pick on Organic Valley. Everybody else is doing it too in retail.
And you guys are the only raw cheese brand that's actually raw.
The FDA told us we're the last ones. And we told them, damn right we're not changing because it's fraud to do otherwise. Our consumers understand and would feel very betrayed and misled if they were given a raw cheese that had actually been pasteurized. There's raw and there's pasteurized. And raw, that's truly raw, has not been heated above body temperature and retains all of its bioactives, which are so health-giving. So,
yeah, I mean, looking at this, it is so small. This
very,
fine
very small
print on the back of the label, I would never read this. I mean, I look at ingredients and sometimes nutrition facts, and that's kind of it.
Yeah.
No one would ever notice this.
It's not required that they actually say that statement on the back. So they could have, that's actually ethical if they did that. Thank you, Organic Valley, for saying that. But at the same time, it is a contrast and conflict within its own label that in fact it's raw, but pasteurized. So
Right.
it's very much a conflict. There are other producers that don't say that on the back, which I would say would be more misleading. But the bottom line is, under the federal code, the word raw is not defined. Pasteurized is, but not raw. And if you're not holding a pasteurizer's license with a permit and actually effectively pasteurizing, you can do whatever you want with the milk, heat it up to whatever temperature you want, and it's not pasteurized because it's not gone through that specific thing. So you can have raw, meaning all kinds of things. Truly raw like ours, or fake raw.
Yep.
There's two kinds of raw milk here. One for humans, one for people, one for the pasteurizer. You don't want to confuse the two.
And in the skincare industry, it's kind of similar. There are these buzzwords like natural or non-toxic. No one is regulating that. No one's checking on that. You could have the most toxic product ever being marketed as completely safe and non-toxic, and it's completely legal.
And we refuse to lie to our consumers. We are ethical, moral people. And we know what's in cheese. We know the bioactives are so important, and they're all destroyed by pasteurization and heat. Those people are looking for unprocessed whole natural foods that have their bioactives in the raw dairy. That would not be a source of it.
And there's absolutely no difference between this and regular cheese.
Not that I'm aware of. That is aged 60 days, which is something you would do on the raw side. But the pasteurization side, the 158 degrees, is definitely pasteurization. Anytime you hit 145 degrees, you started to pasteurize.
So what the FDA wanted, essentially, was for you to lie to your consumers and pasteurize your cheese and label it as raw.
We will not do that. We will not lie. We will not commit fraud. We will not be misleading to our consumers that we care for dearly. So clearly the FDA is not connected to consumers. And I don't serve the FDA. I serve people, not the processor.
And how did they respond when you said that's not something we're interested in doing?
They kind of had to back off because what we're doing is 100% legal and appropriate by code. And their bullying wasn't going to work at Raw Farm.
What was that whole process like internally for you, for both of your kids who have important roles at Raw Farm, and just for everyone in the company? What was it like going through that with the FDA?
You want the true backstory?
I would love it.
I was in Portugal.
Oh yeah, that's right. We were texting.
I was in Portugal for 3 weeks with my wife. We'd planned, I wasn't going to cancel this time with my wife in Europe.
Yeah.
And so...
Because this isn't like the first time something like this has happened to you guys. You're not a stranger to dealing with the FDA and having the FDA come after you.
It's pretty rare that the state of California does something, and when they do something, they probably have something. And we've gotten kind of beyond that because of our testing. But the FDA, they're on a continuous warpath. They see us as a major threat because instead of killing, we test and kill. We have a live step, not a kill step. And they absolutely cannot, they detest that concept. And I think that it's a tribute to our team how well it was handled. Because I was able to get an update every hour, every day or so from my son, 8 hours off because I was in Portugal. But the credit goes to our team who handled it with extreme professionalism because we knew who we served and we had the data. And we asked the hard questions of the FDA that could not and would not respond to those questions, which really exposed the level of concern they had for their own position. They really, really are on thin ice. And so they were trying to bully us, trying to get us to do something from fear versus staying calm and asking for the data. And they refused to respond to us. So I think the professional response really saved the day because they weren't able to bully us.
Yeah, because you guys brought it to the public.
We know how to speak their language. We know the science, probably better than some, but they're pretty good at this stuff. We had the test data, we had the evidence, And we weren't willing to capitulate to their demands because we knew the evidence very, very strongly.
I want to give people some context on just some food safety information I have. So in 2025 alone, over 20 million pounds of blueberries were recalled across multiple states due to E. coli, salmonella, and listeria. Yet culturally, no one seems to question blueberries in the same way people question raw dairy. Why do you think that is?
Today, CDI has uncounted hundreds of thousands of pounds of dried powdered milk.
What's CDI?
California Dairy Inc.
Okay.
It's the big dairy processor in California. I have Dutch friends that are part of that co-op. Are recalling massive amounts of dried powdered milk with salmonella in it. Do you see that in the news?
No.
Nope. It doesn't make news when it's pasteurized. So the bottom line is there's a cultural sensitivity to raw milk that distinguishes it and differentiates it from all other foods. And they're on a warpath to get rid of raw milk. Even though the trend lines are down for illnesses on raw milk, even though consumption is up. There's PubMed on that, showing the data on that. So they are infuriated by the fact that the public will not follow their commands and directions and thinking for themselves that food is medicine and that trust your farmer and become educated. And everybody, the FDA wants everybody to follow them blindly when people are saying, nope, not so much. I want the evidence. Please show it to me. And they won't give it to you.
Do you think media coverage plays a role in the mass panic over raw milk?
There's no question. MSN has continuous scrolling every day of anti-raw milk stuff. Every day. Every day. Thou shalt not drink raw milk.
Jeez.
Women's Health magazine, this, that, and the other thing. All the experts who've never called me to talk about raw milk, who've never contacted the Raw Milk Institute to look at the common standards we vetted 20 years ago with the state of California.
How did that CNN feature come out a few years ago? Because they called me around the same time, little shortly after they contacted you. They totally twisted and made me look really bad and uneducated. Just took, cherry picked what I was saying, but I'm curious how yours went.
We are fringe people to them, unfortunately. And even though we will tell them this is the science we use to understand the gut microbiome, understand the immune system, understand the milk globule, the butterfat globule, which is such an incredible thing. It carries all the carries 60% of the bioactives in the butterfat globule, unpasteurized. I have provided the science to them from their own databases, their own archives at the National Institutes of Health, the CDC, PubMed. I've provided that to them, 50, 60 studies. You never hear about in the news. You never hear about bioactives destroyed by pasteurization. The Cornell study done in 2021, funded by the National Dairy Council. They don't even want to look at that science, which was not funded by raw dairy. It was funded by the pasteurized people. So science doesn't seem to matter. This is an issue about money, politics, and pressure to fall in line along with the rest of the herd and do what everybody else does. And that is not something we do. As pioneers, you try to find out what it is for people, consumers, humanity, what's good for them, and makes our product very, very unique. And other producers of raw milk, too, that are trying to do the same thing, that are thriving, but under pressure from the FDA.
And I think a lot of people know about the influence that the pharmaceutical industry has on the FDA, but can you also talk about the revolving door between the dairy industry and the FDA and how these two are so closely intertwined?
Fundamentally, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, the FDCA, says you can make no claims on any food as medicine. If you do, you've created a new drug, and that's illegal. You only can do approved claims with the FDA, and it costs tens of millions of dollars in 10 or 15 years to get an approval from the FDA. So you can't get an approval on a non-patented food. It just doesn't happen. So food as medicine is a pretty radical thought because it doesn't make more money for pharmaceuticals. Now, on its face, it's like, oh, you're talking about corruption and backdoor dealing. But there's a revolving door between the FDA that regulates pharmaceuticals and those that work in the FDA, back and forth. Send the best from pharmaceuticals over to the FDA to regulate the pharmaceuticals and keep the competition at bay.
Which makes sense because ultimately what they care about is profits. And so they want to influence regulations in a way that benefits what they're doing.
It's profits over people. Bottom line is, as a retired paramedic and seeing so many people with failing immune systems and sickness and stuff, I'm dedicated to people, not profits and pharmaceuticals. Now, we need good pharmaceuticals. I'm not against that. But it should not be the fundamental thing we're doing to make people healthy in America.
Yeah. And so it makes sense to me that revolving door would also exist between the conventional dairy operations and the FDA.
It does. The processors very much are very, very closely aligned with the FDA. I know because I went to the NCIMS conference in 2007 in Florida. And at that dairy conference is the National Conference of Interstate Milk Shipments. The FDA sits in charge of the whole thing. But it's all the processors there. You said Danone there and Organic Valley and all the big processors are sitting there in the room deciding what they're going to do going forward. And that is the place where they decide policy for pasteurized milk. And I actually made a speech there. I made a speech and I talked about raw milk. You could have heard a pin drop.
They didn't want to hear it?
I was told by one of the people attending who said, it was like being at the Vatican and screaming, there is no God.
Wow.
That's how profound what I was saying impacted the people in the room. I say this is exactly what God made. And it's a very interesting thing how excuse for filth has dominated our culture. Where in the 1890s, we all know there was a lot of people that died from raw milk, filthy raw milk in the 1800s. And at the same time, there was some high standards created by the American Association of Medical Milk Commissions, Dr. Coit, and that was the certified raw milk, which Altadena was the last certified raw milk in California in 1999 when I picked up after that. But the pasteurization was the end-all be-all to take care of filth. It's very clear that the culture is so deeply entrenched in America, and they're excusing of filth as part of the standards that it's almost, well, it is embarrassing for them to talk about the fact that you're excusing filth. And by the way, the side effect of that is losing 4 dairies a day in America because the prices are so low that they can't pay their bills. What's interesting is, as a scientist, there are technologies to do better than pasteurization, called HPP. Cold press actually saves about 60 to 70% of these bioactives that are so important. And it's very effective if you pay the farmer better to do a cleaner job, because it'll get rid of the pathogens, but it won't get rid of the dirt. So pasteurization does that. So you actually have to pay the farmers more. The processors know this. The California Milk Advisory Board, Got Milk people know this. We've had long talks with them about innovating to do better for pasteurization and their farmers. They drag their feet. They say they want to do it. God bless them for doing that, but they're not doing it. There's other technologies coming out of Europe, UV, there's ultrasound, there's all kinds of ultrasound plus electricity that actually keep pathogens, they check pathogens, but they keep these bioactives intact. So their failure to innovate is also at their feet. The pasteurization is an 18th century solution to an 18th century problem. Dr. Bruce German, that's not me saying that. That's exactly what it is. We could do better. We put men on the moon. And we know about clean water. We know about healthy cows. We can have the technology to test and know that stuff. So the bottom line is, I put it at their feet, failure to innovate for them.
Talk to us about the epidemic of pasteurization intolerance. A lot of people call it lactose intolerance, but I know you've referred to it as pasteurization intolerance. Can you explain what you mean by that?
We have a very interesting survey we're doing. And we even came up with a QR code, which is pretty cool. And we had all of our raw milk consumers take that survey, and it's done by the Raw Milk Institute. And what it's doing is, it actually is drawing data from people and their experience consuming raw milk. What we found is, raw milk is non-allergenic. Raw milk is generally very easy to consume for most everybody, including Black people and Asian people, which are generally been the non-lactase persistence gene people. They have no problem. So raw milk is good for everybody. Just like breast milk is good for all babies, raw milk is good for all adults and teenagers in every part of life. And that's because raw milk has all the elements in it to digest itself. If it gets warm, it falls apart. It creates its own lactase, the presence of lactose, the digestive enzymes are there, bacteria that make the digestive enzymes are there. It's a whole food. And so we call it pasteurization intolerance, not lactose intolerance.
Yeah, I love that.
Time and time and time again, pasteurization intolerance is shown to be true. And this study is actually going to draw that forward. And we think that maybe Rutgers University is going to do the actual definitive investigation with their PhDs there. Dr. Joe Heckman's leading some of that work. But it's going to be a multi-center study because our friends in Canada cannot study raw milk because raw milk's illegal there. They will not let them do any university research. So we're doing this in collaboration with Canada and CADA, C-A-D-A, which is the Canadian Alliance of Dairy, that are trying to get raw milk legalized in Canada. And they're basically saying so many of us cannot digest pasteurized milk and are highly allergenic to it that we need raw milk, and here are the standards we want to use. Bethany, here's something that nobody's heard, and I'll be the first one to say it. Did you know that pasteurized milk is so allergenic that it causes death?
What do you mean by that?
The National Registry for Allergic Foods, or National Allergy Registry, 15 people in the last 3 to 4 years have died from allergies to pasteurized milk.
Wow.
It structurally has a problem.
Like, drink it, it results in their death.
Paramedics don't get there fast enough, epinephrine, you die.
Whoa.
Severely allergic responses to pasteurized milk.
Like anaphylactic kind of reaction.
Yes, severe anaphylaxis and septic shock.
Wow.
Allergic reactions which end up in death.
I actually didn't know that was possible, to have that severe of a reaction.
Look it up yourself, ChatGPT it, look at it. The National Registry of Allergic Reactions or Allergic Death, 15 people have died in the last couple of years.
Jeez.
My whole point is, it's not a secret. At the FDA website, the most allergenic food in America is pasteurized milk, not raw milk. Raw milk is not allergenic.
Yeah, it's not even the same food.
Nope. When you don't have bioactives, we don't have the raw whey protein, which stabilizes mast cells, which keeps the histamine response from being response. It doesn't have the same kind of cytokine storm that happens in people that are severely. It's just a different food. It's not allergenic. It tastes good and it's easy to digest. So we're looking at some of these first QR code responses that are coming back. A lot of people said, I'm allergic to pasteurized milk. A lot of people said, I just can't drink pasteurized milk. It's so hard, gas producing, cramping, pain. Although I'm not lactose intolerant, I have maldigestion from these pasteurized proteins.
Yeah, because it's not milk.
It's not milk anymore, no. So the science, we're trying to bring the science forward so that data can speak for the consumers directly, not Mark McAfee talking about how great raw milk is. We're letting the science actually do that study and do that testing. And research is going to be very clear on that.
For anyone who is super curious about trying raw milk, but maybe they still have some reservations, can you give us your best sales pitch for why everybody should be drinking raw milk?
If you have a source of reliable raw milk, you should be drinking it. If you don't have a source, find a source or get your source trained, but I would not suggest you go drinking raw milk intended for pasteurization because you could get sick. So know your source, high standards, very, very important. Why would you want to consume raw milk? Well, it's the first food of life. When you're born as a baby, you don't have a digestive tract that's mature. You don't have a microbiome that's 80% of your immune system that's been developed. What does raw milk colostrum and raw milk do? It seeds into the gut, it feeds the gut with lactose, and does all those wonderful things to create the gut microbiome and the mucosal lining that lines your intestines, which forms 80% of your immune system. Think about COVID. Those that were immune compromised got really sick or died. Do you want to be immune compromised? What's the one food that really builds back the immune system more than any other food? The food that built it at the first place in life. And that's been known for 12,000 years for mankind, but it's been suppressed for the last 100 years. So people will recognize the ancient wisdom of raw milk and the bioactives and the whole fats and those things that are literally immune cells carrying the goodness from a cow to a human are there and present and acting, are wanting and demanding it. And so post-COVID, it's been kind of an enlightenment period. People have said, wait a minute, wake up. I want some facts, not so fast. Back off on all the shots and stuff. Before I get a shot, I want to know more. And by the way, I want to know what I can do without that shot, right? And what can I do to prepare myself for the next round of problems that are happening? People are saying raw milk and whole food nutrition are where it's at in terms of building that gut microbiome.
And I'm sure that you have a lot of stories of customers over the years, friends and family, people who have benefited from raw milk. Can you share some of those?
I love the one that happened this morning at our local Organic Roots.
Okay, what happened?
I was in there with Jamie, and we were going over the dairy case, and we were looking for that cheese that wasn't really raw cheese, but they said it was.
Yeah.
And we were talking to the dairy case guy who didn't know.
Uh-huh.
And the gal walked up to me and I introduced myself from Raw Farm, and she was wearing the organic roots. She goes, "Oh my gosh, you're Mark from," I said, "Yeah. You don't know what you've done for my son. He had severe asthma and now he's fine."
Wow.
Her son has completely transformed himself by no longer suffering asthma, which kills 13 people every day. Most of them are children in a day in America. That's every 2 hours. A child dies in America. That's not ER, that's dead. But yet the European studies are so profound that raw milk consumption decreases asthma dramatically, along with colds, flu, ear infections, and fever. That's all immune stuff. So if you got a kid in a daycare, they better be on raw milk because they're the one that's going to come home and not be sick. Or if they're sick, they're really mildly sick and get over it quick when everybody else is out for a week. So raw milk changes the gut microbiome, which is 80% of the immune system, profoundly because the bioactives are there. That's a message I want everybody to hear loud and clear.
That's incredible.
It's powerful. It's profound. It's a gift from Mother Nature, God himself, that this is an evolutionary thing that it created this food that we can thrive on that's being decimated by pasteurization and industrialization.
So those of us in California are blessed that we can easily find raw farm products in most health stores. What do you suggest for people who live in a state where raw farm isn't available? What's a good way to try to find a quality, trusted raw milk source? And talk about which other states you can find your products too.
Well, California is the only state you can find our raw dairy products. The raw cheese can be found through most of the southern states, Texas, Florida, New Mexico, all the Sprout stores. That's the raw cheese, but not the fluid milk and stuff. What I would recommend is first, go to the rawmilkinstitute.org. Look for a listed farmer who uses practices much similar to ours. They report their data. You can actually see their food safety plan and see their bacteria counts from recent testing right now.
Amazing.
So you can look through the pretty roses and white picket fences and know what's going inside of the cow and inside of the milk because you see the bacteria counts. Those farmers are trained and they actually submit their CCPs, their SSOPs, their whole food safety plan, and their bacteria counts every month and are certified by the Raw Milk Institute. That would be my first way to go. Then I'm going to go to realmilk.com and look for the local raw milk producer that specializes in human consumption raw milk. And most of those people have their act together, but I can't speak for them because I don't know them. And after that, then it's going to be kind of Wild West. It's kind of about, you got to know your farmer and know a lot about raw milk. And if you want to know a lot about raw milk, I would say go to rawmilkinstitute.org and go through the raw milk farmer training program. It takes 4 hours. There's a whole PowerPoint that talks about biofilms and tuberculosis and brucellosis. It talks about E. coli and talks about pathogens. It talks about pathogen load and hosts and all these kinds of stuff. That's the training that we provide farmers for free. So become a trained consumer. If you don't have a trained farmer, you're going to have to become well-informed yourself because the FDA is right. When it comes to raw milk intended for pasteurization, their standards suck and they're dirty. And you got to watch your P's and Q's because if you have a compromised immune system, you could very easily get very sick.
What would an ideal future look like for raw dairy in the U.S.?
That it was acknowledged and that the standards were recognized and that there would be a little bit of investment at the FDA, CDC, and NIH in raw milk and the research behind it and its food safety systems. We could do a phenomenal amount of work for really cheap. But the NIH has blocked all funding to anything raw, any raw dairy. We've been back, we've asked them. They said because the FDA does not acknowledge raw milk as a human consumption food, it has to be pasteurized. So the NIH has blocked literally $100 million of access we could have for food safety development and research. And that is a crime, in my opinion, against our humanity. And a complete endorsement of pasteurization, which creates very highly allergenic foods, it's hard to digest, and also pharmaceuticals. And that's pretty sad. So we can do a whole lot better here in America. We can really do a lot better. And we can start off by leading. And I will say this, they may have the guns and the money, but I got the truth and the moms.
That's right.
And the bottom line is, you build a huge market, and at some point there's a tipping point at which our voices and our dollar voting is so much more powerful than what they're trying to yap at us. A cute little story, I may have told it earlier, but it's worth telling again. Last year, one of our trucks was going through a weigh station in Santa Barbara. And going through the weigh station, cleared the weigh station, kept on going, delivering milk to stores. And a CHP officer came screaming up behind with the lights and said, "Stop, stop, stop." Our guy said, "Oh, I got to take it. There's something going on here." The officer said, "Is there any way you could sell me some raw milk?" And they had a bunch of officers at that weigh station that wanted a cheaper access. And now we have a weigh station with an ice chest there, and I think it's a store, a little refrigeration area, where there's a Visa card on for delivery of that milk every week to the CHP office that work for us in California. So that's awesome. The kind of cool thing that's happening in terms of the evolution of the brand, to where our voices become so big and so loud and so profoundly true, based on hard science, based on ethical farming practices and high standards, that the crying wolf from the FDA becomes a crying wolf. And it's already, a lot of influencers are saying, don't believe them, run the other way, it's safer. And unfortunately, it's becoming true. It's really true. And they need to open their minds, they need to open their culture of belief and understand that clean raw milk that's low risk is possible. They just need to learn that. They need to go back to school to understand that.
Totally agree. And I have really seen people rally around you guys, especially in these last few months, which leads me to my last question. I want to hear about Camping with the Cows. You guys just had this incredible event with, I think you said 1,400 people.
1,400 people.
Came out to your farm, spent the night. I saw like a concert there. Like, tell us about it. What happened? The
beauty of the bedhead on the day after is awesome. I love it. True beauty comes forward. 1,400 people. This is the 6th time we've held this. It's 12 years, every other year. We had 75 influencers, which was before we only had 6 or 7 2 years ago. And it was a celebration of a movement more than even a brand. We had other people wanting to celebrate with us and affiliate with us and be connected with us because of the goodness we're doing. And it was all positive. It was all human to human positive energy. When you've got 100 people around a big bonfire and just staring at the bonfire, holding their children, it's powerful.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Moon above us and stars above us, and it was really, really beautiful.
So
Excuse
cool.
me for being emotional, but it's that deep.
Yeah. And this just happened like a week ago, I think. I hope to go sometime in the future.
Well, you were always
really fun.
You're our VIP, but it was a movement, and people came from England, Australia, Canada. We had people from across the United States. We had a band from Texas. The credit goes to my daughter Kaylee, who coordinated it. Took her a year to put together. My son Aaron, who coordinated, and the rest of the team that put it all together. But it was basically the content coming out of that was so powerful, with all the human stories being created. It just moved me. You see my paramedic tears. But it's so true because...
Well, it looked really special. Even just as a bystander, looking at photos and videos online.
You triggered me. You got me triggered on the last call.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that.
That's okay because it's
But I love that your passion came out because you are a very passionate guy. You're the real deal. You truly believe in what you're doing, and I think that's very evident in the work that you do.
We see the impact and purpose on people, and I think there could be no greater gift to a person's life than to see good impact and purpose on people. Just as you have with your pasture bird and things you've done with your chicken, which is eating the right stuff and sunshine and bugs and all that stuff. I mean, we're on the same path together here with real food for people who want to be healthy.
Mark, you've been doing this a long time now. You've been in this fight for a long time, and I think we're starting to see the tides change a bit in our country with health and, like you said, the voices that are wanting to go back to a more ancestral way of living and eating are getting louder and louder and becoming more and more difficult to ignore. What has it felt like to be in this battle for so many years and to kind of see these changes that you're working towards start to come to fruition?
It's been 27 years. That's a long time. At first, it was a niche. And we didn't threaten anybody because it was just a small group of people that wanted their raw milk at Altadena and, Western A Price and just the basics, right? Well, now we're a threat. When CHP officers pull you over and want raw milk off your truck, you've come someplace, right? So my whole point is we're becoming mainstream, which means you're measurable and you're a threat. You're taking dollar votes.
And you have an important voice.
You have an important voice that's being heard, and it's grounded in some serious science. The microbiome, which is really coming into its own now. The gut microbiome is really coming along in terms of its understanding its impact on health. What's it feel like? It feels like when what you're saying shakes your opposition, you're on the right path. Very famous person said that, and I'll say it in his stead. But The bottom line is that we're doing the right things for the right people. And I don't really care what the forces do, because I've got the moms and the truth. That sustains me more than anything, is to have a mom from Organic Roots tell me that her son's asthma's gone away. That's very powerful to me. That's the greatest payment I can receive. And I think that's a payment missing in dairymen across America. Because you're bankrupt and you don't know your customers, it's one of the highest suicide rates going. But raw dairy, get paid well because you set your own price, and everybody's hugging and saying thank you for how great your raw milk is.
Yeah,
it's
polar
delicious.
opposites.
The polar opposite. So it will save the dairyman that wants to embrace high standards in consumers economically and socioeconomically. So that's a beautiful thing for dairies. For the consumers, it's clear. They want more and more because it does such great things for them. So my feeling is, it's a mountain to climb, it's a mountain to move, it's a mountain to die on because of the purpose behind it. And it's, my passion comes from those paramedic calls and those kids, and the fact that this solves that question. There's a major question about pasteurized milk in America as seen by the decline in consumption across the board. We provide a solution, and we provide that solution unselfishly to other farmers as well. So we consider this a movement that's for humanity and people, not a processor or pharmaceuticals. They have a place. They have a place, but their place is not in the preventative food sector that we are, where food is medicine, preventing disease, that people really, really thrive when consuming whole food nutrition.
Mic drop. That was awesome. So grateful for you, Mark. Where can people support Raw Farm and follow along with Raw Farm online?
Social platforms, give us a big heart. Come visit us. Come do the tour. I would say the greatest thing you can do for us and other raw farms, people doing raw, bring a friend in need to raw dairy. That's the greatest thing you can do. Is, do you know somebody that's short of breath? Do you know somebody with really bad eczema? Somebody that's going through the throes of Crohn's disease, celiac? They need to know about kefir and whole food nutrition. Bring a friend to food, real food. Bring a friend to real food. I think that's the greatest thing you can do to support what we're doing, because that sends the message that food is medicine, and that's the place we need to go in the future.
Totally agree. Thanks so much, Mark.
You're welcome. Good job.